All right, buckle up, everybody, because we are about to take a deep dive into one of the most influential and, yeah, let's be honest, challenging works in philosophy. We're talking about Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morals.
This is going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, we're going to unpack all those ideas about where morality comes from, the whole good versus evil thing, even guilt and punishment. And believe me, we know Nietzsche's can be a tough read, so we're here to break it all down and make it a little more, well, digestible.
Yeah, Nietzsche can definitely throw you for a loop with some of his ideas.
You're telling me. Okay, so let's jump right in with one of his most famous and maybe infamous concepts,
Right.
master morality and slave morality.
Intense, right.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But Nietzsche's not just talking about, some abstract ethical systems here. He's talking about how different groups, with different experiences in society, different power dynamics, how they end up developing totally different ideas about what's good and bad.
So right off the bat, he's saying there isn't just one universal set of morals that applies to everyone everywhere.
Right. He sees morality as something much more fluid, much more rooted in power.
Okay, so walk me through this. How do these master and slave moralities actually work?
So for Nietzsche, the masters, these were like the noble class, the powerful, the warriors. Their morality was all about strength, courage, even a certain ruthlessness.
I'm already a little scared of these masters.
Yeah. Well, anything that enhanced their power and vitality, that was good. And anything that weakened them, like timidity, weakness, anything that held them back, that was bad.
So it's almost like a morality that's very self-affirming.
Exactly. It's about imposing your will on the world. Now, the slaves, on the other hand, these were the oppressed, the powerless. Their morality developed as kind of a reaction to the masters.
Almost like a mirror image then.
Yeah, you could say that. For the slaves, good was tied to things like kindness, humility, compassion. It was about turning the other cheek, forgiving those who wronged you, even finding strength in suffering.
It's a morality of the underdog.
Yeah, and so for them, evil is anything that looks like that master morality, aggression, exploitation, that kind of thing.
So basically a complete inversion of the power dynamics, at least when it comes to what's considered good.
Exactly.
And this is where things get a little controversial, to say the least. Nietzsche claims that this slave revolt in morality all starts with the Jews.
Yeah, and this is one of Nietzsche's most provocative and often misunderstood claims.
Well, yeah, it's definitely loaded.
Yeah, you really have to approach it with a lot of nuance. He's not making some sweeping statement about Jewish people in general.
Right.
What he's doing is pointing to a historical development that he traces back to, the Jewish tradition.
Okay, so how does he see this slave revolt playing out?
Well, Nietzsche sees the Jewish prophets as introducing this radical shift in values. They challenge the whole idea that the strong and powerful are just naturally good.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, they flipped the script and elevated the virtues of the oppressed, things like humility, piety, compassion.
So it's like this total overturning of what's considered virtuous.
Precisely, and Nietzsche argues that this reversal has had this huge impact on Western thought, especially through Christianity, which kind of picked up on these ideas and ran with them.
He really hammers this home on the genealogy of morals, doesn't he?
He does. There's this passage where he writes, and I'm just going to quote it here. The Jews, a people born for slavery, as Tacitus and the whole ancient world says, the chosen people among peoples, as they themselves say and believe the Jews brought about that miracle of a reversal of values.
All right, so let me make sure I'm getting this straight.
Yeah.
Nietzsche's saying that the Jewish tradition basically set the stage for this whole critique of worldly power and elevated these otherworldly values.
Yes, exactly. And this is a theme that runs through all of his work. He's very critical of what he sees as the life-denying aspects of Christianity, which he thinks are deeply rooted in this slave morality.
Okay, so we've got these two opposing moralities, the master and the slave.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche is arguing that, at least in the West, the slave morality wins out in the end. But what does that even mean for us, living in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's the question he wants us to grapple with. If our current morality, if it's really based on these values of the weak, on resentment towards power, what does that say about us, about our values, our culture, how we see ourselves?
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a feeling it's going to get even more unsettling when we dig into Nietzsche's idea of bad conscience in part 2 of our deep dive.
Oh yeah, it's about to get real.
So join us next time as we delve into the dark side of human psychology with Nietzsche.
It's going to be a wild ride, so we're diving right back into Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morals.
Yeah, and in this second essay, he really starts digging into those origins of guilt and that whole bad conscience thing, which I got to admit, I kind of got lost here.
Yeah, it can get pretty dense.
It does. So what exactly is he getting at?
Well, Nietzsche's making a pretty radical claim. He's basically saying that this feeling of guilt we have, that sense of owing something to someone, he says it's not actually a natural part of being human.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying guilt is like an invention?
Ah.
That doesn't seem right. It feels so like fundamental to who we are.
It's a wild idea, right? He's saying it's not innate, but rather it's like a product of a very specific historical process.
Okay.
And that process has a lot to do with the development of human memory, self-discipline, and our ability to make and keep promises.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but I'm not quite following the connection here. How do promises lead to guilt?
All right, so think about it this way. Nietzsche describes humans as animals made to promise. Our ability to make promises, to commit ourselves to doing something in the future, it requires a pretty advanced level of self-awareness. Like, we need memory, self-control, the capacity to restrain our immediate impulses for the sake of, something in the future.
So we're not just reacting to our environment like most animals. We're actually holding ourselves accountable to a future version of ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where bad conscience comes in. As we internalize all these social norms and expectations, right, we kind of develop this inner critic, this feeling of constantly being watched and judged, even when we're alone.
It's like we've internalized the judgment of society. We've turned that gaze inward.
You got it. And Nietzsche's arguing that this inward turning of aggression, this constant self-judgment, it becomes the breeding ground for guilt. It's as if we're constantly punishing ourselves for not living up to these, internalized ideals.
Now, Nietzsche doesn't stop there, does he?
Not a chance.
He connects this idea of bad conscience to the development of religion, particularly Christianity.
Oh, yeah. He goes all in on this.
Yeah.
He sees Christianity as basically taking that feeling of guilt and just amplifying it to a whole other level.
Because now you've got the whole concept of sin, redemption, the idea of being eternally indebted to God.
It's heavy stuff. And our natural instincts, even our desires, they get reinterpreted as something to be ashamed of, as sin, that we need to constantly atone for.
So in a way, Christianity takes that inner critic we've been talking about and gives it a cosmic authority.
Right, like that feeling of never being good enough, it becomes tied to divine judgment.
And this system, this whole focus on sin and the need for redemption, Nietzsche's point, is that it's had this profound impact on Western culture.
Oh, absolutely. He sees it shaping everything, our laws, institutions, even our sense of self. It's almost like a psychological straitjacket.
He even argues that the concept of a soul itself is part of this system of control.
Right. He sees the soul as kind of a fiction, a way to create this division within ourselves. We separate from our instincts and desires so we can more effectively judge and control ourselves.
It's amazing how he brings all these ideas together, memory, promises, guilt, religion, even the soul. It's like he's painting this really complex picture of human psychology and all the forces that have shaped us.
It's pretty brilliant and a little unsettling.
So if we're stuck in this cycle of guilt and self-punishment that's been ingrained in us, for centuries, is there even a way out? What's Nietzsche's solution?
He's not big on easy answers, or solutions for that matter. But by understanding where these beliefs come from, he's pushing us to face the possibility that, well, maybe our morals aren't as absolute or objective as we think they are.
That's a big ask, to really examine our values, to understand what purpose they serve and where they come from.
Exactly. And maybe by doing that, we can start to envision a different kind of morality, one that's not based on resentment or guilt, but something more life-affirming.
Okay, this is a lot to process.
Yeah.
We've gone from master versus slave morality to the birth of guilt and bad conscience and Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. But we've got one more major concept to tackle, the ascetic ideal.
Buckle up, because this is where things get really interesting.
I have a feeling this is going to blow my mind. Okay, so we're back and ready to finish our deep dive into Nietzsche. We've covered master versus slave morality, where guilt comes from, that whole bad conscience thing, and his critique of Christianity. And now it's time for what might be his most puzzling idea, the ascetic ideal.
It's a big one, for sure.
Yeah, so prepare to blow my mind.
All right, well, what's interesting about the ascetic ideal is that Nietzsche doesn't just see it as a religious thing.
Oh.
Yeah, he finds it at work in all these different areas: philosophy, art, science, even our everyday lives.
So it's like a fundamental human impulse, something that can express itself in a lot of different ways.
Exactly. At its core, the ascetic ideal is all about turning away from worldly pleasure, denying the body and its instincts, and it's all in pursuit of some higher transcendent goal.
Okay, so I can definitely see that in religion. Think about monks or hermits, people who give up all their possessions and embrace poverty and solitude.
Right, but Nietzsche sees it going even further than that. Like, he sees it in the philosopher who dedicates their whole life to pursuing truth, giving up comfort and worldly success, or the artist who pushes themselves to their absolute limits, even suffering, to create something beautiful.
So it's like there's a willingness to endure hardship, to deny yourself, all in order to achieve something greater, something beyond the everyday.
That's it. And this is where things get a little tricky because Nietzsche sees this impulse as, well, pretty contradictory.
How so?
On the one hand, he sees it as a kind of sickness, a symptom of declining life
A
force.
sickness. That seems a little harsh.
Well, he sees it as like a turning away from life itself, rejecting our natural instincts and desires. Like saying no to the world, our bodies, even our very being.
But doesn't he also acknowledge the power of the ascetic ideal? Like you said, it can be a kind of remedy for some people.
You're right, he does. For people who feel lost, adrift, overwhelmed by the world and all its suffering, the ascetic ideal can give them a sense of meaning and purpose, even a strange kind of joy.
So it's a way to create order and control in a world that feels chaotic and meaningless. But if it can give people meaning, how can it also be a sickness?
It's a paradox, for sure, and Nietzsche recognizes that. His point is that it might be a way of coping, but not a very healthy or sustainable one in the long run.
This reminds me of his analysis of Schopenhauer, that philosopher of pessimism. Didn't he see Schopenhauer as embodying the ascetic ideal?
Absolutely. Schopenhauer was really into Buddhist ideas about suffering and escaping it. His whole philosophy is about renouncing the will to live, detaching from desires and seeking this transcendent peace.
But Nietzsche doesn't exactly let Schopenhauer off the hook, does he?
Nope. He argues that even in this, seemingly selfless renunciation, there's a deeper drive at play. And that drive is the will to power.
The will to power.
Yeah.
So even in Schopenhauer's pessimism, even in his rejection of the world, Nietzsche sees this hidden desire for dominance.
Right. Nietzsche sees the will to power as this fundamental drive that underlies everything we do, even in those who appear to be renouncing it.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this connects back to the master and slave morality we talked about before. Like even in self-denial, there's an assertion of power, a way to control yourself and your desires.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of Nietzsche's biggest questions. What does the ascetic ideal mean? He's asking us to think about, the psychological and cultural implications of this urge to turn away from life, to deny our earthly existence for something higher.
It's a pretty huge question.
It is. It gets to the heart of what it means to be human. Does true meaning lie in transcending this earthly existence? Or do we find it by embracing all of life with all its joy and sorrow?
So what's Nietzsche's answer?
He doesn't really give us a simple answer. Instead, he's challenging us to examine our own motivations, to question the values we hold dear. He sees the ascetic ideal as this complex thing with both creative and destructive potential.
Like, it can inspire great works of art and philosophy, but also lead to repression and a kind of spiritual dead end.
Exactly. Ultimately, he seems to be pointing us towards a way of being in the world that moves beyond the ascetic ideal entirely.
So not just rejecting it, but transcending it somehow.
Yeah, he hints at the possibility of a free spirit who has overcome the limits of traditional morality, someone who embraces life fully, and creates their own values based on a deep affirmation of existence.
So not the master morality, not the slave morality, but something totally different.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about finding a new way to be, a way that doesn't rely on resentment or guilt or denial.
Wow, what a journey this has been. From master versus slave morality to the birth of guilt, the critique of Christianity, and this exploration of the ascetic ideal, Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals has given us a lot to think about.
It really has, and it's amazing how relevant these ideas still are, even though they were written over a century ago.
Totally. He forces us to confront these fundamental questions about who we are, how we choose to live our lives.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners who are now grappling with all these ideas, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from our Nietzsche deep dive?
I think it's the realization that morality isn't this fixed, absolute thing, something that's just handed down to us. It's a product of history, power dynamics, all these psychological drives. Nietzsche makes us see morality as something fluid, something that's always evolving, something we need to keep examining and questioning.
It's a powerful insight.
Mm.
It encourages us to really take responsibility for our own values, not just blindly accept what we've been taught.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Nietzsche. He doesn't give us easy answers, but he provokes us, challenges us, and in the end, he invites us to create our own meaning and values in this world that's constantly
I
changing.
don't know about you, but my head is spinning. We
Yeah.
covered a lot of ground today.
It was a lot. But Nietzsche is one of those thinkers you can spend a lifetime exploring and still find new layers of meaning.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, here's something to ponder. What would it mean for you to become one of Nietzsche's free spirits? What would it look like to create your own values, to move beyond traditional morality and find a more authentic, life-affirming way to be? It's a question worth thinking about.
I couldn't agree more. It's a journey that takes courage, honesty, and a willingness to really face the complexity of our existence.
And on that note, we'll leave you to explore the depths of Nietzsche's thought. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.